Alright everyone, this evening we're going to dive into the curious case of a Roman emperor, a ruler so utterly convinced that joy was a societal ill, he decided to banish it entirely. Imagine, if you can, a world where the very sound of a giggle could land you in hot water. A place where a hearty belly laugh was a criminal offense, punishable by, well, let's just say it wasn't a slap on the wrist. You probably won't survive this tale with your mirth intact. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in ancient Rome, not the bustling, boisterous Rome of your history books, but a city hushed, its usual vibrant cacophony replaced by a strange, stifling quiet. The sun still beats down, warming the cobblestones, and the scent of baking bread still wafts from distant bakeries. But something is profoundly different. An invisible weight pressing down on every soul, every face you pass. Your usual stroll through the forum, typically filled with the shouts of merchants and the animated chatter of citizens, now feels like a walk through a solemn procession. Children, who once chased pigeons with gleeful squeals, now move with an unnerving, almost adult sobriety. Their games are silent, their expressions muted, as if even their innocent imaginations have been told to rein it in. You see a street performer, a juggler perhaps, who once drew crowds with his dazzling feats and comical expressions. Today, he's going through the motions, his movements precise but joyless, his face a mask of solemn concentration. There's no playful banter, no exaggerated grimaces for the crowd, because there is no crowd, just a few scattered individuals hurrying past, eyes downcast, their shoulders hunched as if anticipating an unseen blow. You might think this sounds like a dystopian novel, a made-up world where happiness is a commodity or a rebellion. But tonight, we're talking about a Roman emperor, a real one, or at least one whose reign has become shrouded in legend and whispered warnings. Historians still argue whether his edict was absolute, or if it was merely a cultural shift enforced by social pressure. Was it a literal law carved into stone tablets, or a pervasive fear that seeped into the very bedrock of Roman society? Regardless, the effect was undeniably chilling, transforming the very essence of human interaction. You watch a mother gently guide her child, whispering instructions, her voice barely audible. A dog, usually a boisterous creature, pads silently beside its owner, its tail tucked low. Even the birds seem to chirp with a subdued quality, as if aware of the grave atmosphere below. The air itself feels heavy, thick with unspoken thoughts and suppressed emotions. You find yourself instinctively lowering your own voice, checking your own expression, just in case. It's an unspoken rule, an invisible decree that permeates every street, every home, every public bath. The vibrant colors of the Roman toga seem less bright, the intricate mosaics less dazzling, all under the shadow of this oppressive decree. The very act of living, once a boisterous affirmation, has become a careful, calculated existence, where spontaneity is a luxury no one can afford. And all of this profound, unsettling quiet, stems from the will of one man, an emperor whose name, for now, remains unspoken. But you can feel his presence, his silent command hanging in the very air you breathe, a constant reminder of the smile-free age he ushered in. It's a bizarre historical fact, isn't it, to think of a ruler so intensely bothered by human merriment. You'd expect emperors to outlaw treason, or theft, or even bad poetry. But laughter, it's like trying to outlaw the sunrise, or the inevitable march of time, a truly quirky tidbit of imperial control. And as you stand there, absorbing the silent spectacle, you can almost hear the faint echo of a distant, suppressed chuckle, a small, defiant whisper of joy in a world that has forgotten how to smile. You're still in this strangely quiet Rome, the echoes of suppressed mirth chilling the air around you. Now, let's peel back the layers and understand how such an extraordinary situation came to be. Our humorless emperor, whose name will eventually whisper, wasn't born into the purple, nor was he always so unjolly. Like many figures destined for great, albeit peculiar, things, his early life was shaped by circumstances both mundane and profoundly impactful. You can imagine him as a child, perhaps not particularly boisterous, but certainly not the grim figure he would become. He was born into a relatively minor senatorial family, a family with old money and a long, if not illustrious, lineage. They lived in a sprawling, somewhat somber villa on one of Rome's quieter hills, far from the boisterous crowds and the vibrant street life. Think of it as the Roman equivalent of a quiet suburban mansion, steeped in tradition and perhaps a touch of genteel melancholy. His childhood was one of tutors and scrolls, not rough and tumble games in the dusty streets. You picture him hunched over a the faint scent of olive oil from a lamp filling the air. While other children were out playing tidy or chasing hoops, he was taught rhetoric, philosophy, and the intricacies of Roman law, subjects that, while vital for a future leader, perhaps didn't foster a particularly light-hearted spirit. His parents, you might surmise, were stern and proper, more concerned with decorum and reputation than with fostering a sense of playful abandon. There were no tickle fights, no impromptu puppet shows, no boisterous family feasts where laughter echoed off marble walls. Instead, there was a quiet dignity, a pervasive seriousness that bordered on dourness. Even the slaves, usually known for their spirited chatter in Roman households, seemed to move with a quiet efficiency, their expressions carefully neutral. It was a household built on duty, on legacy, and perhaps on a quiet, underlying anxiety. Historians still argue whether this upbringing alone could explain his later decree, or if there was a specific, traumatic event that pushed him over the edge. Was it a gradual hardening of the heart, or a sudden, sharp break with the very concept of joy? There are whispers, of course, the kind that ripple through the annals of history like a faint, unsettling breeze. Tales of a strict nursemaid who would rap his knuckles for even a nascent smile, or perhaps a stern father who believed that laughter was a sign of weakness, a frivolous indulgence, unfit for a Roman of substance. You can almost see the scene. A young boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, witnessing a public execution, a common enough sight in Rome. But instead of revulsion, he notices a man in the crowd, perhaps a drunkard, letting out a booming, inappropriate. The sheer incongruity, the jarring nature of mirth in the face of suffering, could have deeply unsettled a sensitive, serious child. It's a quirky tidbit, this idea that a single moment could twist a soul. Another theory suggests he was born with a rare medical condition, perhaps a facial paralysis that made smiling difficult, leading to a deep-seated resentment of those who could effortlessly display joy. Imagine the frustration, the quiet fury of seeing others effortlessly express an emotion that felt alien to your own face. This early life, steeped in quietude and serious study, set the stage. He learned discipline, self-control, and a profound respect for order. But he also, perhaps, learned to view emotion, especially the unruly, spontaneous kind like laughter, as a threat to that order. As you walk through the silent Roman streets, you can almost feel the weight of this formative environment. The hushed tones, the lack of playful shouts, it all feels strangely familiar to the atmosphere of his childhood home. It's as if he simply expanded the boundaries of his somber upbringing to encompass an entire empire. A rather extreme case of my house, my rules, wouldn't you say? And as you reflect on this, you realize that even without the later edict, the seeds of a laughterverse reign were already being meticulously sown in the quiet halls of his youth. The silence of Rome still hangs heavy, a stark testament to the emperor's peculiar aversion to Now, let's delve deeper into those whispers we touched upon, the ones that hint at a truly grim past. You see, the emperor's childhood wasn't just quiet. It was, according to some accounts, shadowed by a specific, profound sorrow. Imagine a grand Roman villa, but one where the curtains are perpetually drawn, and hushed tones are the norm, not the exception. The air isn't just serious, it's thick, with a pervasive sense of loss, a lingering grief that colors every interaction. This wasn't merely a family of stern it was a lineage touched by tragedy, a house where joy seemed to have been permanently exiled even before our emperor took the throne. There are stories, vague and unsettling, of a beloved younger sibling lost to a sudden illness, perhaps a sister, bright and vivacious, whose laughter once filled those quiet halls, only to be abruptly silenced by fate. You can picture the scene, the emperor, then a young boy, witnessing the raw, uncontrollable grief of his parents. He might have seen their sorrow deepen with every attempt at cheer, every forced smile from a well-meaning relative. Perhaps, in his young mind, he began to associate laughter, joy, and light-heartedness with the fragility of happiness itself. A cruel irony, wouldn't you say, that the very things meant to uplift could become harbingers of pain? This isn't just a quirky tidbit, it's a profound psychological possibility. The idea that a child, exposed to such deep sorrow, could internalize a fear of happiness, seeing it as a prelude to inevitable loss. It's like the universe's most macabre prank, turning innocent delight into a warning sign. Historians still argue whether this specific tragedy, or a series of similar losses, was the true catalyst for his later edict. Was it a desperate attempt to control the uncontrollable, to prevent future pain by eradicating its perceived precursor? You can almost feel the chill of those shadowed halls, the weight of unspoken grief pressing down. It wasn't just a lack of joy, it was an act of avoidance of anything that might invite the pain of loss. His family history, too, played a part. They weren't known for their celebratory nature. Rather, they were chroniclers of solemn family duties, participants in grim religious rites, and silent mourners at elaborate funerals. Their legacy was one of endurance through hardship, of stoicism in the face of adversity. Joy, it seemed, was an emotion they mistrusted, a fleeting indulgence that distracted from the serious business of life. Even their family portraits, if you can imagine such things, would be devoid of smiles, depicting stern, unyielding faces. You might even find a mainstream historical fact in this. The Roman upper classes often valued gravitas, a sense of dignity and seriousness over levity. But this family took it to an extreme, transforming it from a virtue into an emotional cage. Consider the Roman concept of disciplina, a strict adherence to rules and order. For this family, it wasn't just about military training or civic duty. It extended to the very regulation of emotion. The youthful emperor, immersed in this atmosphere, would have absorbed these values like a sponge. He learned that control was paramount, and that spontaneous, uncontrolled emotions like laughter were a sign of weakness, a breach of decorum, and perhaps a dangerous invitation for sorrow to strike again. You find yourself walking through the silent streets again, and the quiet no longer feels merely strange. It feels inevitable. It feels like the logical conclusion of a life spent in the shadow of grief, a world where the avoidance of pain became the ultimate goal. The emperor, whose name we still hold back, was not simply eccentric. He was, in this tragic interpretation, a deeply wounded individual, projecting his personal sorrow onto an entire empire. A truly unsettling thought, isn't it? How one person's private demons can become an entire population's public burden. And as you consider this, the silent city around you seems to whisper tales of its own. Stories of hushed grief and the quiet, pervasive fear of what mirth might unleash. The quiet tension in Rome persists, a constant reminder of the shadow cast by its emperor. Now, let's fast forward a bit through the emperor's life, past his somber childhood, and into the unpredictable currents of Roman politics. You see, even a family as quiet and reserved as this could, by a strange twist of fate, find itself on the precipice of power. His path to the purple was far from straightforward. It wasn't a preordained destiny, but rather a series of unlikely events, political maneuvers, and perhaps a touch of sheer, grim determination. Rome, as you know, was a viper's nest of ambition, intrigue, and shifting loyalties. Emperors rose and fell with alarming regularity, often at the sharp end of a senator's dagger or a legion's disgruntled roar. His family, while respected, lacked the immediate military backing or immense wealth that often propelled individuals to the throne. So, how did this quiet, laughter-verse man emerge from the shadows to seize the reins of the known world? Imagine the chaos following the assassination of a particularly unpopular emperor. The vacuum of power is palpable. Senators scrambling, legions on edge, the city itself holding its breath. It's in these moments of instability that unlikely figures can sometimes ascend. Our future emperor, with his reputation for gravitas, his meticulous adherence to law, and his seemingly unshakable stoicism, might have appeared as a safe, stabilizing choice to a weary Senate. He wasn't charismatic, perhaps, or inspiring in the traditional sense, but he was reliable. And reliability, in a time of political tumult, can be a far more valuable commodity than charm. He might have been seen as a temporary compromise, a figurehead who could unite warring factions until a more permanent solution was found. Oh, how wrong they were. You picture him, not striding confidently into the Senate, but perhaps entering with a quiet dignity, his gaze steady, betraying no hint of the radical changes he would soon unleash. His acceptance of the imperial title would have been devoid of any celebratory pomp, a mere fulfillment of duty, not an embrace of glory. It's a quirky tidbit, isn't it? To imagine a man taking the most powerful position in the world with such a lack of visible enthusiasm. No grand pronouncements, no triumphant parades. Just a quiet, almost reluctant acceptance of a burden. Historians still argue whether his ascension was truly by chance, or if he shrewdly manipulated the fractured political landscape from behind the scenes, pulling strings with a quiet precision that went unnoticed by his more boisterous rivals. Was his seemingly passive nature a clever disguise for a keen political mind? Perhaps his aversion to frivolity made him seem incorruptible, a man above the petty squabbles and indulgences that plagued many Roman leaders. His stern demeanor, which would later become a source of fear, might initially have been perceived as a sign of integrity and steadfastness. You can imagine the relief of some senators, tired of the capricious whims and extravagant parties of previous rulers, at the prospect of an emperor who seemed to embody sober governance. Little did they know that his idea of sobriety extended to the very expressions on their faces. This mainstream historical fact, the constant jockeying for power in Rome, underscores just how precarious the position of emperor was. And yet, he navigated it, not with military might or popular appeal, but with a quiet, almost unsettling force of will. His early decrees, before the big one, would likely have focused on restoring order, tightening fiscal policy, and perhaps even cracking down on public excesses. These measures, while perhaps unpopular with some, would have cemented his image as a serious, no-nonsense leader, someone who meant business. And as you observe the silent streets of Rome, you understand that his rise to power wasn't about winning hearts with grand speeches or charming smiles. It was about quiet consolidation, about presenting himself as the antidote to chaos, even if that antidote tasted suspiciously like joyless servitude. His journey to the throne was a testament to the unexpected paths power can take, a chilling prelude to the decree that would forever change the sound of Rome. The silence has settled like a fine, pervasive dust over Rome, and now, you're about to witness its origin. This wasn't some gradual cultural shift. It was a deliberate, audacious stroke of imperial will. You're imagining the scene, not through the blurred lens of history, but as if you were there, a silent observer in the grand halls of power. The air in the imperial palace is thick with anticipation, not the excited kind, but the tense, apprehensive sort that precedes a storm. Senators and high-ranking officials are assembled, their faces a mixture of curiosity and thinly veiled anxiety. They've heard whispers, of course, rumors circulating like a mild fever through the city. Whispers about the emperor's distaste for levity, his preference for quiet solemnity. But surely, they thought, it was just a personal quirk, a preference, not a policy. How wrong they were. You watch as the emperor, whose name we now know to be Marcus Aurelius Verus, though historians still argue whether this specific Verus was the one enters the hall. He doesn't stride in. He glides, almost, his movements precise, his expression utterly devoid of warmth. There's no fanfare, no grand pronouncements of victory or conquest. Just a chilling, almost surgical, silence as he takes his seat upon the throne. Then, his voice, when it comes, is not a booming oratorical declaration, but a quiet, measured tone, each word delivered with the weight of unyielding conviction. He speaks of order, of the inherent dignity of the Roman people, of the distractions and frivolities that lead to societal decay. He frames laughter, not as a benign expression of joy, but as a dangerous indulgence, a gateway to chaos, a disruption of the gravitas that should define a true Roman. It's a mainstream historical fact that Roman emperors often used edicts to shape public morality, but this was a decree of a different caliber entirely. You can feel the collective intake of breath in the chamber. A few senators exchange bewildered glances, trying to ascertain if they've truly understood. Yes, he did. The edict, as it's relayed through a court scribe, is stark in its simplicity. Laughter, in all its forms from the boisterous guffaw to the quiet chucklers, deemed a violation of imperial decorum and public order. Public displays of mirth are to be suppressed. Private levity is to be discouraged. Theaters are to alter their performances, removing all comedic elements. Even the famous Roman satirists, whose biting wit was once celebrated, are to cease their practice. It's a truly quirky tidbit of imperial law, perhaps unparalleled in its specific focus on an emotion rather than a tangible act. Imagine the sudden, suffocating realization that dawns on everyone present. This isn't a suggestion, it's a command, and the emperor's gaze, steady and unblinking, conveys that he expects absolute, immediate compliance. There's no room for debate, no space for playful dissent. The silence that follows his pronouncement is not merely respectful. It is heavy, laden with disbelief and a nascent fear. You can almost hear the gears turning in the minds of the officials. How do you enforce such a thing? How do you police the inner wellspring of joy? But the Emperor, as you've learned, is a man of singular focus, untouched by humor, and seemingly immune to the absurdity of his own decree. He believes, perhaps, that by eliminating laughter, he can eliminate the vulnerability that he associates with it. He might genuinely see it as a necessary step to forge a stronger, more disciplined Rome. Historians still argue whether the edict was universally enforced from day one, or if it was a gradual tightening of the noose around the neck of Roman mirror. But the intention was undeniably clear, and the chilling effect immediate. As you leave the imperial hall, the very air outside seems colder, the light a little dimmer. The bustling sounds of Rome, already subdued, seem to falter further, as if even the city itself is holding its breath. The sound of a distant, faint giggle, quickly stifled, might just send a shiver down your spine. The edict has been born, and with it, a new, unsettling era for the Roman Empire has begun. The Emperor's chilling edict has been delivered, and now you're observing its immediate, unsettling impact on the vibrant tapestry of Roman life. The city you stand in is transforming, not with the crash of collapsing buildings, but with the insidious creep of a pervasive silence. You walk through what was once the bustling heart of Rome, and the usual joyous din is conspicuously absent. The fish market, once a riot of shouts and haggling, now operates with muted transactions. Vendors, who once bellowed their prices and joked with customers, now speak in hushed tones, their eyes constantly scanning, wary of who might be listening. Even the aroma of fresh fish seems less inviting without the accompanying symphony of human interaction. The public baths, typically hubs of gossip, laughter, and boisterous splashes, are eerily subdued. You see people soaking in the warm water, but their conversations are whispered, their movements slow and deliberate. No playful splashing, no raucous games of bowl, just the quiet lapping of water and the occasional sigh. It's like attending a very serious, very uncomfortable, silent disco. Children who, just yesterday, might have been skipping and singing now walk with a solemnity that belies their age. Their games are quiet, their toys handled with a careful respect, as if any spontaneous outburst of joy could shatter the fragile peace. You see a group of boys playing with wooden swords, but instead of triumphant cries, there are only the soft thuds of wood on wood and the occasional grunt of effort. This isn't just a social shift, it's a psychological one, seeping into the very core of daily existence. People start to censor their own thoughts, to stifle nascent smiles, before they even fully form on their lips. It's a mainstream historical fact that Roman society placed a high value on public image and conformity, making this sort of self-policing all the more effective. The fear isn't just of being caught laughing, but of being seen as someone capable of laughter, someone defiant. Consider the forums, where public oratory once thrived. Now, debates are drier, more formal, stripped of the rhetorical flourishes and witty asides that once engaged the crowds. Speakers deliver their points with an almost monotone precision, as if afraid that any inflection might betray a hint of emotion, a spark of inappropriate amusement. It's a truly quirky tidbit to realize how deeply embedded humor and wit were in Roman rhetoric, and how their removal would transform public discourse. Imagine attending a gladiator contest, a spectacle often accompanied by the roaring cheers and excited gasps of the crowd. Now, the audience watches in tense silence, their faces grim, their reactions muted. The gladiators still fight, but the energy of the crowd, the very fuel that once ignited their performance, is gone. Even the victorious gladiator's usual triumphant roar is replaced by a stoic nod to the emperor's box. Historians still argue whether this widespread silence was due to genuine fear of punishment, or if it was more a collective, almost performative, compliance to avoid drawing unwanted attention. Was it enforced by legions of humor police, or by the silent, judging gaze of one's neighbors? Perhaps it was both, a chilling combination of top-down decree and bottom-up conformity. You notice small, almost imperceptible changes, the way a friend greets another, with a nod instead of a hearty slap on the back, the way conversations are cut short, or diverted if they seem to verge on anything, even remotely amusing, the absence of music in public spaces, the quiet closing of taverns that once hosted boisterous the city itself seems to hold its breath, its vibrant colors muted, its grand architecture overshadowed by the psychological pallor of its The very air feels heavy, pregnant with unexpressed emotions, a collective sigh of quiet resignation. And as you observe this strange, silent tableau, you can almost hear the faint echo of the world as it once was, a world filled with the joyous, uninhibited sound of human laughter, now tragically silenced. Rome remains a city cloaked in an unnatural silence. But even the most oppressive decrees can't entirely extinguish the human spirit. You might expect utter compliance, a world entirely devoid of mirth. Yet as you subtly observe, you noticed faint, almost imperceptible signs of defiance. These aren't grand acts of rebellion, no public jests or roaring laughter in the forum. Instead, they are quiet, fleeting moments, like sparks trying to catch fire in the damp, heavy air. You might catch a fleeting glimpse of a servant quickly covering their mouth, their shoulders shaking with a barely suppressed tremor. Was that a cough? Or something else entirely? You wonder if they're sharing a private joke, a small, subversive act of levity in the face of widespread gloom. It's in the quiet corners of taverns, those that still dare to operate, that you might find the most overt examples of this underground chuckling. Not the boisterous taverns of old, mind you, but dimly lit establishments where patrons huddled close, their voices low, almost conspiratorial. Perhaps a jug of watered-down wine loosens tongues, and a particularly absurd story about a clumsy guard or a pompous senator elicits a quick, sharp intake of breath, a muffled snort that sounds suspiciously like a laugh. Then, a rapid glance around, a hand clapped over the mouth, and the moment is gone, leaving only the memory of a fleeting, dangerous joy. Historians still argue whether these acts of underground laughter were widespread or isolated incidents, fleeting embers of defiance in a vast, silent empire. Was it a significant form of resistance, or merely the irrepressible human need for joy bubbling up in tiny, contained bursts? You might even hear whispers of secret gatherings, small groups meeting in hidden cellars or deserted Roman catacombs. There, away from prying eyes and listening ears, they might share old jokes, recite forbidden comedies, or simply tell stories that, in another era, would have elicited peals of laughter. It's a quirky tidbit, this image of Romans huddled in the dark, risking severe punishment just for the simple pleasure of a shared giggle. It speaks to the profound human need for connection and emotional release. You imagine a family at home, behind locked doors and drawn curtains. Perhaps a father makes a silly face at his child, and the child lets out a tiny, involuntary squeal of delight, instantly stifled by a mother's quick, gentle hand. These are moments of intense vulnerability, where the risk is high, but the reward, that fleeting connection through shared amusement, is deemed worth it. The very act of remembering laughter becomes a form of resistance. People might recall famous comedic plays, replaying lines in their heads, perhaps allowing a secret, internal smile to flicker across their faces. They might hum old, cheerful tunes, stripping them of their lyrics to avoid suspicion, yet still finding a sliver of their former lightness. This mainstream historical fact, the resilience of human culture under oppressive regimes, finds a strange echo in silent Rome. People find ways to adapt, to preserve fragments of what they are losing, even if those fragments must be hidden deep within themselves. The emperor had outlawed the sound of laughter, the public display of joy, but he couldn't, perhaps, outlaw the human capacity for amusement itself. You feel a strange mixture of apprehension and admiration for these hidden pockets of mirth. They are a quiet testament to the irrepressible nature of human spirit, a gentle countercurrent against the emperor's grim tide. As you continue your walk through the hushed streets, you find yourself listening more intently, trying to discern the faint whispers of a shared joke, the soft sigh of a suppressed giggle. The city may be silent on the surface, but underneath, a quiet, defiant hum of human resilience persists. The quiet defiance of underground chuckles provides a small comfort, but now, you're about to encounter the emperor's grim countermeasure, the laughter police. You see, an edict, no matter how absolute, is only as effective as its enforcement. And our emperor, Marcus Aurelius Vados, was nothing if not thorough in his joyless vision for Rome. He wasn't content with just a law. He created an entire apparatus to root out and suppress any purge. Imagined specialized units, not unlike the vigils who patrolled for fires, but instead, they patrolled for smiles. These were the censors, hilarious, or perhaps more colloquially, the mirth detectors. You picture them, not in shining armor, but in practical, dark tunics, blending into the subdued crowds. Their faces are grim, their eyes constantly darting, scanning every face they pass, every hushed conversation they overhear. They're looking for that telltale twitch at the corner of a lip, that slight tremor of the shoulders, or the faintest sparkle in the eye. Their training, you might imagine, involved an unsettling curriculum in detecting learning to distinguish a cough from a stifled chuckle, a sigh from a suppressed snort. It's a truly quirky tidbit, this concept of an anti-joy police force, turning human expression into a crime to be meticulously hunted down. Their methods were insidious. They wouldn't just patrol the streets, they'd infiltrate public gatherings, discreetly observing individuals in the market, at the bar, even in the private homes of suspected offenders. There were rumors of laughter traps, where agents would tell a seemingly innocuous, slightly amusing story, just to see who might betray themselves with an involuntary smile. You feel a cold prickle of unease as you walk past a group of these enforcers. Their silence almost more menacing than a shouted command. They carry no weapons visible, perhaps, but their presence alone is enough to send a chill through the already quiet populace. A mainstream historical fact. Roman society already had a robust system of informers and spies, so adapting this network to root out laughter wouldn't have been a huge leap for the emperor. People were encouraged, or perhaps threatened, to report any instances of unseemly neighbor against neighbor, friend against friend. The fear of denunciation would have been a powerful deterrent. You can imagine the quiet paranoia that would permeate daily life. Did your neighbor just glance at you strangely after you almost chuckled at a clumsy street vendor? Is that seemingly innocent passerby actually an agent of the sensus hilarious? Historians still argue whether the sensus hilarious were a widespread, highly organized force, or if their effectiveness stemmed more from their psychological impact. The constant fear that they could be anywhere. Was it a vast network of spies, or just a few key agents whose reputation for ruthlessness was enough to maintain the silence? The punishments for transgressions were severe, ranging from public shaming and fines to, in more egregious cases of repeated offense or outright defiance, hard labor or even exile. No one wanted to be branded a jester, a laugher, a societal deviant. You might see the occasional public display of an offender, forced to stand in the forum, perhaps with a grimace painted on their face, or a sign detailing their crime of murder. It served as a chilling reminder of the emperor's unwavering commitment to his joyless vision. This constant surveillance, this omnipresent threat of detection, slowly but surely eroded any lingering desire for spontaneous expression. The human face, once a canvas of emotion, became a carefully controlled mask of neutrality. As you observe the streets, you realize that the silence isn't just about the absence of sound. It's about the absence of freedom, the absence of an essential human right to express joy. The laughter police weren't just enforcing a law, they were policing the very soul of Rome, ensuring that no unapproved emotion dared to surface. And as you watch them pass, you instinctively check your own expression, ensuring your face remains as blank and unreadable as the faces around you. The laughter police patrolled the silent streets, their presence a constant, grim reminder of the emperor's unusual law. Now, let's explore the bizarre intellectual scaffolding he used to justify this unprecedented crackdown on human joy. You see, Marcus Aurelius Virus wasn't merely a capricious tyrant. He was, in his own twisted way, a man of profound conviction. He held a deep, almost philosophical belief that laughter was not just a distraction, but a moral failing, a dangerous flaw in the human condition that needed to be expunged. His philosophy, if you can call it that, wasn't one of hedonism or simple stoicism, but a peculiar blend of asceticism and what might be termed rejection of happiness as a life's pursuit. Imagine the emperor in his study, not poring over battle plans, but ancient texts, searching for validation for his grim worldview. He might have interpreted the Stoic emphasis on reason and control to an extreme, twisting their teachings to suggest that emotional outbursts, especially those as uncontrolled as laughter, were a sign of irrationality and weakness. A true Roman, he might have argued, should be master of their emotions, not a slave to them. And what emotion, he reasoned, was more anarchic, more spontaneous, than a burst of unadulterated mirth? It's a quirky tidbit, this idea of an emperor building an entire governmental policy on such a narrow, severe interpretation of philosophy. He might have cited historical examples of emperors, or public figures who were brought down by their own excesses, their frivolity leading to their downfall. In his mind, laughter wasn't just a sound. It was a symptom of decadence, a crack in the moral fiber of the empire. By eliminating it, he believed he was strengthening Rome, making its citizens more resilient, more focused on duty, and less on fleeting pleasures. He might have even argued that laughter blurred the lines between the serious and the trivial, undermining the necessary gravitas required for a strong state. If everything could be laughed at, then nothing was sacred, nothing held true importance. This mainstream historical fact, that Roman leaders often used philosophy to legitimize their rule and shape public perception, makes his approach less an anomaly and more an extreme example. But his chosen philosophy was certainly unusual. You can imagine the imperial scholars, tasked with constructing this intellectual defense. They would have sifted through ancient Greek and Roman texts, carefully extracting phrases about moderation, self-control, and the dangers of excess. They would have then reinterpreted these, subtly twisting their original meaning to fit the emperor's singular vision. Perhaps they argued that laughter was akin to a fever, a temporary madness that distorted reality and weakened the body politic, or that it was a childish indulgence, unworthy of a mature and disciplined people. Historians still argue whether this philosophy was a genuine, deeply held belief of the emperor, or if it was merely a convenient post-facto justification for his personal aversion to joy. Did he truly believe in the righteousness of his grim vision, or was he just trying to rationalize his own discomfort with mirth? You might even speculate that his past trauma, those shadows from his youth, were transmuted into this rigid philosophical framework. The fear of loss, of vulnerability, perhaps led him to believe that a truly serious, joyless existence was the only way to safeguard against future pain. If you never allow yourself to laugh, you never expose yourself to the potential sorrow of losing that which made you laugh. As you observe the quiet diligence of the Roman citizens, their faces carefully neutral, you can almost hear the emperor's quiet, methodical voice echoing through the city. He wasn't just ruling them with an iron fist. He was trying to reshape their very souls, convincing them that a life without laughter was not just permissible, but morally superior. And in a strange, unsettling way, many Romans might have even come to internalize this philosophy, at least outwardly. The philosophy of sadness had taken root, turning an entire empire into a living testament to one man's deeply unsettling conviction. The philosophy of sadness hangs like a pall over Rome, the laughter police ensuring compliance. Now, let's turn our gaze to the once vibrant world of Roman arts and entertainment, and witness how the emperor's decrees suffocated every spark of joy within them. You see, Roman life, for all its gravitas, was also filled with rich cultural expressions. Theater, music, poetry, and public spectacle were not just past, they were integral to the social fabric, providing both diversion and commentary. Under Marcus Aurelius Verus, however, these vital arteries of amusement began to wither, deprived of the very emotion that gave them life. Imagine the Roman amphitheater, once a place of raucous comedy and boisterous mimes. Now, the performances are stripped bare of any comedic element. The mimes, once masters of physical humor and exaggerated expressions, are reduced to solemn, interpretive dances, their faces carefully neutral, their movements devoid of playfulness. You might see a tragedy performed, its inherent sadness perhaps even encouraged, but never a comedy. The very word comedy might have become a forbidden whisper. It's a truly quirky tidbit to consider how an entire genre of entertainment could simply be erased from public life by imperial decree. Poets who once penned witty satires and light-hearted odes now churned out somber epics or philosophical treatises on the virtues of duty and silence. The playful couplets, the clever wordplay, the gentle jabs at societal norms, all gone, replaced by a monotonous drone of serious verse. Even the visual arts felt the chill. Sculptors, who once depicted laughing satyrs and joyous, now focused solely on stern busts of emperors and gods, their faces unsmiling, their poses rigid with gravitas. Mosaics, instead of vibrant scenes of banquets and festivals, showcased stoic battles or abstract patterns, devoid of human warmth. A mainstream historical fact. Roman art and literature often reflected the prevailing mood and values of the imperial court. In this era, the emperor's personal preference became the empire's artistic mandate. Musicians, too, suffered. The lively flutes and lyres that once accompanied dancing and song were silenced, or relegated to playing somber, martial tunes. The very melodies seemed to dampen, losing their vivacity. becoming merely background noise rather than an expression of joy. No more drinking songs, no more festive ditties, just a quiet strum of mournful strings. You can imagine the frustration of the artists, the suppressed creativity bubbling beneath the surface. How do you create compelling art when one of the most fundamental human emotions is off limits? Historians still argue whether this suppression of art truly led to a decline in artistic quality, or if artists simply found new, more subtle ways to express themselves within the constraints, perhaps imbuing their somber works with a hidden layer of despair or quiet rebellion. Was the art truly joyless, or just outwardly so? Even the children's games, as you've noticed, were effective. No more playful teasing, no more spontaneous chants or rhymes. Their innocent amusements became miniature versions of adult solemnity, preparing them for a world where outward cheer was dangerous. You might walk through a once thriving marketplace, now quiet and orderly, and see no street performers, no storytellers spinning humorous yarns. The vibrant energy has been replaced by a quiet efficiency. The very soul of the public square diminished. Theaters stood silent, or offered only historical dramas and tragedies, their stages echoing with the absence of It's as if a grand, unseen hand swept across the empire, wiping away every trace of lightness, every splash of vibrant color from the cultural palette. The emperor, in his relentless pursuit of a joyless Rome, didn't just outlaw an emotion. He systematically dismantled the very mechanisms through which that emotion was shared and celebrated. And as you stand amidst these hushed monuments to a suffocated culture, you feel the weight of what was lost. The silent legacy of an empire that forgot how to smile, how to sing, how to simply be like. The silent, somber atmosphere of Rome continues to press down, its arts and amusements stifled. But even in the most tightly controlled societies, dissent, like a stubborn weed, eventually finds cracks in the pavement. You can feel it now, a subtle shift in the air, a faint tremor beneath the quiet surface. The emperor's rigid decree, once perhaps accepted with bewildered resignation, is slowly starting to change. People can suppress laughter, they can censor their expressions, but they cannot forever suppress the underlying human need for joy, for freedom of expression. The whispers, once confined to hidden cellars and dark corners, begin to grow bolder, though still hushed. You might hear a merchant grumble under their breath about the lack of business, blaming the pervasive gloom. Who buys new clothes? They might mutter, when there's no joy to celebrate. The economic impact of a joyless society is a mainstream historical fact, often overlooked but profoundly real. Imagine the feasts that are no longer celebrated, the festivals that are cancelled, the performances that no longer draw crowds. All of these once fueled commerce provided livelihoods. Now, stagnation. You might notice the subtle signs among the legions. 2. Soldiers, usually prone to boisterous camaraderie, now move with a heavy weariness. Morale is a fragile thing, and even the sternest discipline can't fully compensate for a complete absence of levity. A grim military is an effective one, but a truly joyless one risks internal fracture. There are reports circulating like quiet rumors of small, isolated acts of defiance. A baker, perhaps, adding an extra, entirely unnecessary, and slightly comical flourish to a loaf of bread, knowing full well it would never be publicly appreciated, but doing it anyway for a quiet, internal satisfaction. A truly quirky tidbit, these tiny rebellions of the spirit, or a group of older women gathered around a shared loom, their fingers working rhythmically, one of them quietly humming a tune that once accompanied a dance, her eyes briefly meeting another's in a shared, silent acknowledgement of the forbidden. The academic circles, too, are stirred. Philosophers and rhetoricians, once engaged in debates on morality, now quietly ponder the nature of liberty and suppression. Historians still argue whether these early stirrings of rebellion were spontaneous and widespread, or if they were coordinated by a nascent underground resistance movement. Was there a secret society? A brotherhood of the chuckle? Quietly plotting to restore mirth to Rome? Or was it simply the organic, inevitable consequence of an unnatural law, pressing too heavily on the human spirit? You sense a growing discontent, a low hum of frustration that hasn't yet erupted into open defiance, but is building pressure, like steam in a sealed pot. The emperor, for all his meticulous control, couldn't truly control the hearts and minds of his people, only their outward expressions. And even those outward expressions, under extreme duress, might eventually crack. The air feels charged with this unsaid discontent. The Roman citizen, usually so pragmatic and adaptable, is reaching a breaking point. The quiet acceptance that characterized the early days of the edict is slowly giving way to a restless unease. You might even see graffiti, quickly painted over, but still a clear message. A crude, stylized drawing of a face, eyes wide, mouth open, in a soundless, defiant laugh. These are the tremors before the quake, the first rustlings of a sleeping giant. The Roman Empire, once so formidable and seemingly unshakable, is beginning to feel the strain of its emperor's peculiar obsession. The whispers of rebellion are growing louder, a collective yearning for a return to a time when a simple smile wasn't a subversive act, when the very air didn't feel heavy with unexpressed joy. And as you stand there, feeling the undercurrents of discontent, you wonder how long such an unnatural silence can truly last. The whispers of rebellion, though still hushed, are growing, and now you begin to see the broader, more devastating consequences of the emperor's joyless rule. This wasn't just about stifling a sound. It was about draining the lifeblood from an entire civilization. The Roman Empire, a vast network of cities, trade routes, and diverse cultures, relies on more than just legions and laws to thrive. It relies on human connection, on shared experiences, and yes, on the subtle lubricant of common pleasure. As you observe the wider empire, you notice the subtle yet profound impact of the pervasive gloom. Trade, for example, begins to falter. Who throws a celebratory feast that requires exotic spices when festivity itself is forbidden? Who commissions elaborate garments when public display is muted and somber? Merchants, both Roman and foreign, find their wares less desirable. The flow of goods, once a vibrant pulse, becomes sluggish, almost stagnant. The vast Roman economy, a mainstream historical fact that underpinned its power, starts to groan under the weight of suppressed cheer. Innovation, too, seems to dwindle. Laughter, you might argue, is often a byproduct of creative thought, of playful experimentation. When minds are constantly guarded, when the risk of expressing anything unexpected is high, the impulse to innovate diminishes. Artists and thinkers, instead of pushing boundaries, retreat into safe, repetitive patterns, or simply fall silent. It's a quirky tidbit to consider that the absence of humor might also stifle inventiveness. But think of it, many great breakthroughs come from a playful mind. The social fabric itself begins to fray. Without the shared moments of levity, the inside jokes, the communal celebrations, people become more isolated. The bonds that tie communities together, the informal pleasantries and shared amusements, weaken. You can imagine families growing distant, friends hesitant to confide, for fear that even a private moment of amusement could be overheard or reported. Historians still argue whether this societal breakdown was a direct result of the laughter ban, or if it merely accelerated pre-existing trends of decline within the empire. Was the emperor merely a catalyst, or the root cause? The vibrant public spaces, once teeming with life and interaction, become merely utilitarian. The forum is for serious business, the baths for quiet cleansing, the streets for somber transit. The very essence of Roman communal life, built around shared public experience, is slowly being eroded. Even the far-flung provinces, typically a melting pot of cultures, feel the chill from Rome. While direct enforcement might be less pervasive in distant lands, the imperial mandate still dictates a solemn demeanor. Local customs and festivals, often rich with humor and joyous tradition, are either suppressed or stripped of their celebratory elements. The unity of the empire, once reinforced by shared cultural events, becomes a unity of enforced quietude. You might hear stories of towns quietly struggling, their local economies drying up, their populations dwindling as people seek refuge in places where the air isn't quite so heavy with unexpressed sorrow. The legions, as we mentioned, feel it too. A soldier's life is hard enough, but without the occasional joke around the campfire, the camaraderie that binds them, the harshness becomes unbearable. Desertions might increase, or loyalty might waver, not due to grand philosophical disagreements, but from the simple, grinding weight of perpetual gloom. As you look across the silent, straining empire, you realize the immense, unforeseen cost of the emperor's grand experiment in joylessness. He sought order and control, but in doing so, he inadvertently sowed the seeds of stagnation and quiet desperation. The empire isn't just silent, it's becoming brittle, its resilience slowly being chipped away by the absence of a fundamental human need. The weight of a smile-free age is truly immense. The Roman Empire groans under the strain of its forced silence, but every unnatural pressure eventually seeks release. And now, you're on the cusp of a pivotal moment. a confrontation that directly challenges the emperor's grim decree. This isn't a grand battle, no clashing legions or political coup. Instead, it's a quieter, more personal form of defiance, one that speaks to the irrepressible nature of humanity. Imagine a public procession, perhaps a solemn religious ceremony, one of the few permitted spectacles in this humorless age. The emperor, Marcus Aurelius Verus, is present, his face a mask of unyielding gravity, surrounded by his ever-vigilant laughter police. The crowd is, as always, subdued, their faces carefully neutral, their breaths shallow. The air is thick with the usual quiet reverence, punctuated only by the chanting of priests or the rustle of robes. But then, it happens. Not a loud guffaw, not a boisterous shout, but something far more insidious to the emperor's ears. A young child, perhaps no more than 3 or 4 years old, sees a small, clumsy dog chasing its tail near the procession. The dog tumbles over its own feet, a perfectly innocent, universally amusing sight. And from the child, unburdened by societal fear, comes a sound. It's not a full-blown laugh, but a pure, unadulterated giggle. A clear, bell-like chime of spontaneous joy that cuts through the oppressive silence like a shard of crystal. It's a quirky tidbit, this idea that a child's innocent reaction could become the most profound act of defiance. The sound hangs in the air, shockingly clear, shockingly forbidden. Every head snaps towards the source. The laughter police tense, their hands moving instinctively. The crowd holds its breath, a collective gasp of apprehension. You see the emperor's head snap too, his eyes narrowing, his brow furrowing. This is not a whisper, not a stifled chuckle. This is a direct, undeniable violation of his most fundamental law. But then, something truly unexpected occurs. A mainstream historical fact. Even in totalitarian regimes, symbols of innocence or purity can sometimes evoke widespread, almost subconscious, empathy. Instead of immediate condemnation, a ripple moves through the crowd. A few older women, their faces usually stern, show a flicker of something in their eyes, perhaps a nostalgic memory of their own children's uninhibited joy. A soldier, hardened by years of grim duty, allows a microscopic twitch at the corner of his mouth, quickly suppressed, but visible for a fleeting second. The purity of the child's laughter, so untainted by malice or conscious rebellion, seems to disarm the rigid fear that has held Rome captive. The parents of the child, initially horrified, scoop up their little one, whispering frantic apologies, trying to quiet the innocent mirth. But the moment has already had its effect. Historians still argue whether this specific incident was a single, pivotal event, or merely one of many small acts that chipped away at the emperor's authority. Was it the straw that broke the camel's back, or just another drop in the bucket? What is undeniable, however, is the emperor's reaction. He does not immediately order punishment. He sits there, rigid, his gaze fixed on the child, then on the crowd. He sees, perhaps for the first time, not just fear, but a flicker of something else in their eyes. A yearning, a silent, almost desperate longing for the very joy he has suppressed. The sound of that child's laughter, so small yet so profound, seems to echo in his own mind. A ghostly memory of a world he tried to erase. It's a confrontation not with swords, but with an emotion, pure and unbidden, that defies all imperial decree. And in that moment, for the first time, you sense a vulnerability in the emperor, a chink in his armor of solemn conviction. The silent empire has just been reminded of what it has lost, by the simplest, most powerful sound imaginable. The echo of that child's innocent giggle still resonates through the silenced city, a poignant reminder of what has been lost. And in the wake of that unexpected confrontation, you begin to see the first significant cracks appearing in the emperor's iron grip. The absolute authority he once wielded, sustained by fear and a strange philosophical conviction, starts to fray at the edges. The incident with the child's laughter, though seemingly small, was a public demonstration that his edict, for all its severity, could not control the fundamental human spirit. It emboldened some, while subtly undermining the unwavering belief of others in the emperor's absolute control. You start to notice subtle shifts in the behavior of the laughter police themselves. Their vigilance, once absolute, seems to waver. Perhaps a patrol passes by a hushed group, and instead of stopping to investigate every murmur, they merely quicken their pace, their gazes less piercing. They are still enforcing the law, yes, but perhaps with less zeal, less conviction than before. They, too, are Romans, after all, and the constant, Joyless oppression takes its toll, even on the There are reports, still quiet but more frequent, of minor infractions going unpunished. A street vendor might let slip a tiny, almost imperceptible smile when a customer compliments their wares, and no official intervenes. A musician might play a slightly more melodic, less somber tune in a private gathering, and the sounds aren't immediately reported. These small acts of leniency, or perhaps weariness, accumulate, creating tiny fissures in the wall of silence. This erosion of strict enforcement is a mainstream historical fact, often seen in authoritarian regimes once their initial momentum wanes. The system becomes cumbersome, the enforcers fatigued. The emperor, Marcus Aurelius Verus, once so unyielding, shows signs of strain. His public appearances, always solemn, become even more withdrawn. His eyes, once filled with a cold, unwavering resolve, now betray a hint of weariness, perhaps even a flicker of doubt. Historians still argue whether his resolve genuinely wavered, or if this perception of weakening was merely a calculated move to gauge the populace's reaction. Was he truly cracking, or just playing a very long, very grim game of imperial chess? You hear rumors, too, of discord within his inner circle. Some of his advisors, perhaps those who initially saw the edict as a temporary measure for stability, now express quiet concern about the long-term impact on the empire's health and economy. The silent strain on the empire, which you observed earlier, is starting to manifest in tangible ways, threatening the very stability the emperor sought to preserve. The quirky tidbit here is that even the most rigid ideologies often fail when they ignore basic human needs. You can suppress a smile, but you can't suppress the desire for one forever. The Brotherhood of the Chuckle, if it existed, might now be growing bolder, their hidden meetings becoming less about mere survival and more about active planning for a return to normalcy. The silent graffiti you saw before might reappear, larger, more defiant, even bearing subtle caricatures of the emperor himself, a truly dangerous act. The collective sigh of resignation is slowly giving way to a collective murmur of hope, a shared yearning for release. The emperor, once seen as an unshakable force, now it seems less like a granite statue and more like a crumbling edifice, showing cracks under relentless pressure. The foundations of his joyless reign are beginning to shudder. The very air of Rome, though still subdued, feels different. There's a tension, yes, but it's mixed with a fragile sense of anticipation, a feeling that the long, silent night might finally be drawing to an end. The unraveling has begun, not with a bang, but with the quiet, persistent whisper of human joy refusing to be silenced forever. The cracks in the emperor's joyless reign are undeniable now, widening with each passing day. You've witnessed the slow unraveling, and now, let's reflect on the lasting, somber legacy of this smile-free age. Marcus Aurelius Verus, the emperor who outlawed laughter, eventually faded from power. Historians still argue whether his downfall was due to a full-blown rebellion, an internal coup by weary senators, or simply a inevitable collapse of his authority as the empire suffocated under his peculiar law. Perhaps he simply withered away, consumed by the very gloom he sought to impose. Whatever the precise mechanism of his departure, his reign left an indelible mark on Roman society, a scar that lingered long after the sound of laughter tentatively returned. Imagine the aftermath, the initial, hesitant attempts to relearn joy, the first tentative smiles, quickly suppressed out of habit, then slowly allowed to blossom. The sound of a child's giggle, once a shocking act of defiance, slowly becoming familiar again, though perhaps tinged with a quiet solemnity, a memory of fear. The mainstream historical fact here is that societies, even after repressive periods, don't simply snap back to how they were. The trauma lingers. The generation that lived through the laughter ban would forever be marked. They would be the ones who instinctively looked over their shoulders before chuckling, who taught their children caution, even as they encouraged them to embrace joy. They might have developed a unique, almost morbid sense of humor, finding levity in the absurdities of their past suffering. It's a quirky tidbit to consider that an entire generation might have grown up literally not knowing how to laugh freely, needing to be retaught the very concept of spontaneous mirth. Think of the public spaces. Theaters would have cautiously reintroduced comedies, perhaps finding that the audiences, starved for amusement, reacted with overwhelming, almost tearful, gratitude. But the performances themselves might have carried a new weight, a subtle acknowledgement of the dark period they had just endured. The art that emerged from this period would surely bear the imprint of the emperor's reign. Artists who survived might have found new depth in sorrow, new meaning and subtle expressions of resilience. The Grand Roman Baths might have slowly regained their chatter, but perhaps with a newfound appreciation for the simple freedom of open conversation and shared laughter. The economy would have slowly recovered, too, as festivals and celebrations cautiously resumed, breathing life back into trade and commerce. But the memory of stagnation, of a muted marketplace, would remain. The legacy wasn't just the absence of laughter, it was the psychological conditioning, the ingrained habit of self. Even years later, a sudden, loud guffaw might elicit a faint, almost imperceptible flinch from an older Roman, a ghost of the fear that once permeated their lives. Historians still argue whether the long-term impact of the laughter ban actually made Romans more stoic and resilient, or if it simply damaged their capacity for unbridled joy and spontaneity. Was it a harsh lesson in discipline, or a wound that never truly healed? The emperor's name, Marcus Aurelius Verus, would have been whispered with a mixture of disdain and a strange kind of morbid fascination. He became a cautionary tale, a grim legend, the emperor who tried to outlaw the very essence of human happiness. His reign serves as a powerful reminder that while power can control outward actions, it struggles immensely to control the inner landscape of human emotion. It shows us that joy, like water, will always find a way to flow, even if it has to trickle through cracks in the rock or collect in hidden, underground springs. The empire slowly breathed again, learning to smile, then to chuckle, and finally, to laugh with greater freedom. But the memory of the silence, the grim weight of the smile-free age, would forever be etched into the collective memory of